I want to share with you how learning Spanish has challenged my leadership. You know what, as leaders, we have to learn new languages. Now, we may actually have to learn a new language if we're working internationally, or there may be some team members that we're working with that are international. But even if we don't have to learn a new, direct language, we do have to learn new languages. When we're leaders, we are quite often stepping into new team environments, new projects, new organizations, and every organization, every team, every project, they've got their own language. Whether it be just physical language, whether it be technical language, or whether it may just be an intercultural language that they have, that they've kind of built up amongst themselves. Yeah, little things like in-house jokes and technical language that they use, or just slang and jargon. If we're leaders, we need to be able to communicate with people effectively. We need them to be able to understand us, and we need to be able to understand them if we are going to influence them and lead them effectively. You know, as I've mentioned a number of times before, I've recently moved to the Dominican Republic, so I've had to learn a new language. Now, my wife speaks Spanish, and I've been trying to learn Spanish on and off for many years, and gotten good and then rusty again, and I've been learning Spanish probably close to maybe 10 years, very rusty. But recently, since moving here, I had to double down on learning Spanish. And so I want to share some ideas of how learning Spanish has challenged my leadership. But you may be considering, hey, I'm a leader, and why do I have to learn a new language? I'm not moving to a new country. Well, The Economist actually reported that people who speak more than one language are likely to earn 2 to 15% more than someone who doesn't speak a second language. And if that's not inspiration enough, just learning a new language has been proven to increase problem solving, increase creativity, increase brain functionality and decision-making skills. And so all of these characteristics are really powerful for us as leaders to be able to make better decisions, to be able to think on our feet, to be more creative. And why would we miss an opportunity to be able to enhance those skills? Hey, learn a new language. But also, as you're growing as leadership and in your influence, I'm sure you will start to come across new cultures, people overseas that you're working with, or even people within your own teams as they grow. You will attract people from different cultures. And if you learn another language, it opens up a whole nother opportunity of a people group and cultures that you can connect with. I remember when I first started Spanish, like I said, probably like 10 years ago, when I was planning a church, I actually attracted a large percentage of a Hispanic community because I was learning Spanish. I was able to connect with them just a little bit, and they felt comfortable because I was making an effort to speak in their language. So instead of just being able to attract Australians, my campus was able to attract quite a decent sized Hispanic group just because I spoke that language. So what you'll find is as you're leading, as you're building your organization or your ministry, if you actually venture out and learn a new language, it could open yourself up to being able to lead and influence a whole nother community. But there's really 2 key ways of how learning Spanish has challenged my leadership. The first being, we must learn intentionally. That's right, like I said, I've been learning Spanish on and off for probably close to 10 years. Now, I've gotten good. I've done some trips overseas to Colombia, to the Dominican Republic and other places where I was able to practice it and got a little better at times, but I wasn't really intentional with learning it. I learned a little bit every now and then and here and there, but because I wasn't intentional with learning it, I wasn't able to grow and develop that skill so that I could actually become influential with Spanish. But in recent times, when I knew I was going to be moving to the Dominican Republic and now being here, I knew how important it was for me to be able to communicate with my family here, as well as communicate with everyone else and get around in general life. And so I've been a lot more intentional with learning. Now, I've done that over time intentionally with some practical training programs. I learned Rosetta Stone initially. In recent times, I've been using the Duolingo app, which is absolutely incredible. It's great for me to be able to develop my skills, and I'm spending intentionally, I've got blocked out every day a set amount of time for me to sit down and learn my Spanish. I also jump in when I'm waiting for something or got a few moments to spare or want to kind of break. I'll just open up my phone and I'll go through and I'll intentionally learn. And what I notice is there's sometimes that I'll be really busy during the week and I haven't studied that much. I may get in and do 5, 10, 15 minutes a day on it. And those weeks I notice that my Spanish actually drops off. But then there's other weeks where I spend my full hour that I have set aside to do Spanish plus all the extras. I notice that in those times when I'm more intentional, I'm learning and I'm actually getting better. Now you're probably thinking, yeah, that's great for you learning Spanish, but I'm not planning on traveling to the Dominican Republic, so I don't necessarily want to learn a new language. But as a leader, you need to learn new language all the time. Like I said at the start of this video, it's not just languages. There is a different language that people use. Like there's technical information that people use. There's jargon and slang that people use. And so when we're leading a team, remember there's going to be a bunch of people in that team that speak a different language. And so we need to not only learn practically about a language, we also need to learn practically about the technical language that someone is going to be speaking. You know, I'm very fortunate that many years ago, I actually taught myself how to code. When websites first became a thing, I actually taught myself how to do CSS coding in Dreamweaver. And over time, I've kept myself reasonably up to date on doing basic code. I can jump back in a website, I can alter some code. I know how to do the basics. So when it became time to develop my app, I was working with my developers, and rather than them talking a technical language that I didn't know, I was able to at least understand what they were saying. But beyond understanding what they were saying, I too was able to communicate to them in a way that they understood, because I understood the parameters. Also, because I understand that language, I'm able to understand the purpose and the outcome, and we're able to communicate better and drive towards that outcome. Because I'm not just talking about front-end stuff, I can talk about back-end coding because I actually understand the language. You know, I've also been self-taught at video editing, and so I've got an incredible team of video editors, and when I'm communicating with them, I've used the software programs that they're using. I know how to edit, although nowhere near as good as they edit, obviously. Thank you to them who make me look amazing on these videos. But without being able to understand that basics, it's harder for me to be able to communicate to them the outcome of a project, to be able to give them feedback on things. Because I can communicate their language, I can talk about the specific technical information when they're talking about a software, when we're talking about a track, when we're talking about whatever it may be within our communication. Because I actually understand their language, I'm able to talk their language, I can understand them, but they can also understand me, and so I can be more effective in leading them. Now, beyond learning the technical stuff, there's some practical things we need to learn as well. You know, here in the Dominican Republic, they, like Aussies, are very heavy slang driven. They cut words in half. They have local slang, like everywhere does. Everywhere has their own jargon, right? You know, like for example, in Australia, I'm going to pop down to the servo, mosey on over to the bottle-o and get me a stubby so I can throw back a cold one, right? You probably understood none of that unless you're an Aussie, and you understood everything that I said. Even though I spoke English, none of you understood that unless you're an Aussie. And let me interpret that, right? Pop down to the servo. That means I'm going to go to the gas station or petrol station in Australia, gas station pretty much everywhere else. Pop down just means I'm going to go to. And then servo, it's a service station, so we cut it in half and just call it servo. Then I say a mosey on over. Mosey on over means I'm going to walk to whatever place I'm going. Mosey just means a slow stroll, right? And then to the bottle-o, that's the bottle shop or the liquor store or whatever you call it in your part of the world, wherever they sell alcohol. Then I said I'm going to grab myself a stubby. Now, grab just means I'm going to go buy, right? I'm going to grab. And a stubby is actually a short bottle of beer that is quite popular in Australia, a stubby. And then I said, so I can throw back a cold one. That just means so I can have a drink of a cold beer, have a cold drink, a cold one. And so it's just a typical example of how jargon and slang can really interrupt our communication in influencing people. Because if I wanted to share that with you and you didn't understand that, I'm not influencing you. And also, if you're someone who I'm leading and you spoke to me with that sentence and I didn't understand what you were saying, how am I meant to understand you to be able to give you feedback, to be able to give you direction, to be able to influence you if we're not speaking the same language? So it's really important to be able to learn the jargon of your team. When you're leading a team, you'll go into that team and each team will have a specific type of jargon, right? And they'll all have their own, each team will kind of have its own, I suppose, inbuilt culture. And so we need to be able to influence them to be a part of that team. We need to communicate like them, or at least be able to understand what they're saying so we can understand their jargon. Learning Spanish, like I said, Dominicans, they use a lot of slang here. And it really helps to be able to understand, yes, I'm learning the technical stuff from Duolingo, but actually understanding the nuances of the little slangs that they have. Like, so for example, que lo que. Que lo que. If you're Dominican, you know what I'm saying, right? It's just pretty much the Spanish way of saying what's up, right? But the literal translation of that is what it what. What it what, right? When they first started saying that to me, I was like, what it what? Like, I didn't even understand. Now, I walk into my barber or whatever, and I'm like, que lo que? And they all love it because, I'm being a part of their community. I'm actually speaking their slang, their language. And so we're connecting at a deeper level. And so you should see people light up when I start using local slang here in the Dominican Republic. And so if you really want to influence people, you must be really, really intentional to learn their language, learn their literal language, but also understand their technical language and the jargon that they share as well, so that you can influence them and also understand them. Talking about slang leads me on to my next point, and that is be a part, not a part. Let me say that again. Be a part, not a part. And I get my video editor to put that up on the screen for you so you can see the literal difference of it. Be a part, not be a part. And what I mean by that is I want you to be a part of the community, not be apart from the community. And that's one key way of how learning Spanish has challenged my leadership. Because learning Spanish, yes, learning all the technical words and learning the language is important, but kind of going on to the learning the slang, I can only do that by actually being a part of the community. And so what I find is one of the biggest challenges that I've had in learning Spanish is being isolated. I know it may not seem like I'm a bit of an insular person. I'm actually quite of an introvert. I would much prefer to stay at home, work, record a bunch of content for you guys, maybe go and do some speaking engagements, jump up on stage, everything like that. But I'm much of a homebody, and I know my place, and then that's it. And so when I'm here in the Dominican Republic, one thing that I can get trapped with is because I'm working with clients from all over the world, I'm building my app, I'm doing all these things in the background, I can be trapped in my studio all day, every day, and just not get out. And what I found is that when I wasn't getting out, I wasn't getting better at Spanish. Yes, I was learning it on the app, but I wasn't actually getting out and using it. And so because I wasn't a part of the community, because I had isolated myself, I wasn't able to practice my language. I wasn't able to learn all the slangs and the jargon that they use. And I wasn't able to develop it in the real world. I'm talking about me learning Spanish and isolating myself here, but it is so easy for us in business and as leaders to isolate ourselves, especially if we don't feel like we completely connect with our team. We can be separated from them. We can lock ourselves in the office. We can find ourselves just being separate and only barking orders or commands at them, or you only meet when you have official meetings and then everything else is separate. The team go off and do their own thing. Well, how are you meant to understand their language, learn their language, and practice their language if you're not a part of what they do? If you're apart from what they do, you become isolated. And as a leader, if you're isolated, you can't influence anyone as you're isolated. In ministry also, it's very easy for us to get caught up into the running of the church and all the admin things and preparing our sermon and doing all those things that kind of keep us busy. But if we're not actually out and being a part of our community, how are we meant to influence our community? If we're not a part of our congregation's lives, how are we meant to influence them? If it's just a Sunday or a Saturday, depending on which day you go to church, if it's just one day a week that you, for like an hour or two, that you get to influence them, how are you really influencing them? So let me encourage you, don't isolate yourself as a leader if you want to influence people, because you need to learn their language, learn and understand their jargon, learn and understand their culture so that you can better influence them. Another way that you can be apart and not apart is don't rely on others to be your conduit. When I first moved here to the Dominican Republic, I must admit, I kind of just ignored everything that required Spanish, handed it over to my wife, delegated it to my wife for her to do, and tried to have as minimal contact with speaking Spanish as I could. Although I wanted to speak Spanish, I left all the important stuff up to her and I just stayed in my world. And what I found is I was using my wife as a little bit of a crutch. And I wasn't actually developing my Spanish. I wasn't actually developing my communication skills. And so I realized that by relying on just one person to be my communication channel, that limited my ability to be able to learn and understand the language. And so I then stopped relying on my wife. In leadership, we can have this as well. We can have a right-hand man, a 2IC, an assistant, or someone that we kind of just focus on doing our thing and we just get that person to be the communication channel. And what you'll notice, and I'm sure you've seen this, is that 2IC becomes really good at being able to interpret, just like an interpreter would between two languages. They build a relationship and an understanding of the language of the team, and then they come back and relay to you in your language and interpret it in your language. And so there's this disconnect between the languages, and you yourself as a leader aren't able to learn their language, and therefore it's really your 2IC or your assistant or your right-hand man or woman that is the person that is having the influence and not you. So as a leader, to learn your team's languages, let me encourage you, don't rely on someone else. You be the person that does the work to communicate the message. Which leads me on to the last point of how we can actually be a part and not be apart from our community so we can learn their language, so we can communicate and influence them to them better, is we need to be in controlled environments. That's right, to learn Spanish, to get out there and be a part of the community, I had to start using it in controlled environments. So for example, when we go fill up the car, I would be the person that would communicate to the person to fill up the car. Yeah, because in the Dominican Republic, they have someone that fills up the car. And so I would learn what I would say to them. And at the start, and I would have my sentence, "Llénalo con premium, por favor," which just means fill up with premium, please. And then they'd start replying back to me, and I'd keep turning around to my wife going, what are they saying? But over time, because it was this controlled environment, I knew what they were going to ask me. I knew the questions or where the conversation was going. So because it was a controlled environment that I knew was something related to the car or to the petrol or whatever, I was able to better, almost interpret and predict what they were going to say. And even if I didn't quite understand what was said, I understood the context. When I go to the shop and I'll go and pay, although they may throw some stuff back at me that I don't always understand what they say, I understand the concepts because I know the key things. They ask for your tax number, they ask you if you want a receipt, they ask you cash or card, like there's some basic things that they ask. And so even though they may say a lot of words and I only kind of understand one of them, because I understand the context, I'm able to kind of predict and interpret what they're saying. And so I found that by putting myself in controlled environments, going to the gym, interacting with people at the gym, there's a few things that like, have you finished? How many more have you got to go? And I know that they're asking me, how many more have you got to go? And are you using this? And things like that. Because I kind of know the general things that people are going to say in the gym, it's much easier for me to be able to interact with people because it's a controlled environment. So to first be a part of the community, maybe find some controlled environments where you know the context, where you know the outcome. Maybe it's a project meeting. You know specifically what you're going to be talking about so you can understand the general jargon or slang that they're using that will all drive around the same outcome. So how learning Spanish challenged my leadership was that I learned to be a part and not be a part. So as a leader, to influence our team, we have to be able to communicate their language. And let me encourage you, maybe learn the language of your team, but also, what about learning a new language? Maybe it might expand your area of influence. I mean, because I'm learning Spanish, I now have a whole nother people group that I can actually influence and teach and train because I'm developing their language. And who knows, if you learn a new language, maybe you too could grow your influence. Hey, if you like that, give it a thumbs up and put a comment below. I'd love to hear the slang that you use in your country or in your team that's unique to you. And if you want to learn more leadership lessons from everyday events that have challenged my leadership, it'd be an honor if you considered subscribing.